Welcome everyone on our show, The Success Stories, brought to you by Trident Communication. Our guest for today, Dr. Sandeep Vaish, Executive Director, Neurosurgery, Fortis Hospital, a neurosurgeon who has conducted more than 15,000 surgeries and treated patients from more than 96 countries. Welcome, sir, on our show, Success Stories. A very warm welcome, Sandeep ji, on our show, The Success Stories. Thank you for your time and thank you for being with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
Sir, we begin with simple questions. I would like to know about your journey and how has been the journey so far. So let's start. And my very first question to you, sir, is how did you, decide to become a doctor and that too a neurosurgeon?
Well, I never had to think too much about it. My dad is also a very senior neurosurgeon. And when he became a neurosurgeon, I was just 3 or 4 years old. And at that time, there were so few neurosurgeons in the country. He was actually the first neurosurgeon in central India. So when he finished in neurosurgery, everybody used to call me a junior neurosurgeon. So I never thought of doing anything else. So nobody pushed it on me, but yeah, I always wanted to be a neurosurgeon.
So how was it like? So you started from your schooling days. You were very clear you wanted to get into this field, and you were born and brought up in Delhi. And
I was born and brought up in Gwalior, where my father was, and I did my schooling and my MBBS from there. Then I did my general surgery residency from Gwalior. And then later on, I did my neurosurgery residency from All India Institute of Medical Sciences in Delhi, which is the most premier institute in India. And then later on, I became a faculty there, worked there for about 11 years. And then I left the institute and joined private practice.
So as a professional, you have been based out of Delhi, mainly?
For the last 30 years, I have been in Delhi.
Okay. Wow. So, what was your first? When was it that your first independent surgery, which you did, and how was the feeling about it?
Well, I was lucky enough to do my first independent brain surgery when actually I was doing my general surgery residency. We were on rotation posted to neurosurgery department, and I had a thesis on some neurosurgery topic only. So I was posted there for a longer period. So I became friends with the various doctors there, and my dad being the neurosurgeon there. So they really taught me. And I did my first head injury surgery while doing my surgery residency. And I can't tell you the feeling in words. It was really exhilarating and really exciting because as junior resident in general surgery, we did not even get independent general surgery cases to do. And I was doing a neurosurgery case, which I always wanted to do. So,
and in that moment, you realized that this is the right profession, right passion, right field to be in?
Sort of, but I still gave it a chance because I was interested in cardiac surgery also. So I waited till the last moment to choose between cardiac surgery and neurosurgery. And then actually after doing my general surgery, I realized that cardiac surgery did not excite me that much. And so I chose neurosurgery finally.
So any unique experiences or incidents while being in a surgery?
That's a tough one because it's very difficult to recall a singular incident during any surgery. Most of them, what you recall is only catastrophic events which happened to you over the years. But many times when you go, actually not many times, sometimes it happens that you go in with a diagnosis of a very bad disease, a highly malignant tumor. And occasionally during surgery, you find out that the radiologist was wrong and it turns out to be some other thing, some infection or something. And at that time, you'll feel really happy for the patient. And other thing that I can say, the aneurysm surgery. You know what aneurysms are? Aneurysms are basically outpouchings of a blood vessel. They are very thin walled and they rupture very easily and can lead to instant death. and lucky few patients survive and they reach the hospital, and then you have to operate to clip them so that they don't rupture again. So dissecting them is a very challenging task. And sometimes when you're working under a microscope dissecting an aneurysm, your heart is beating fast, and then suddenly it ruptures and you see a gush of blood rushing towards you in the microscope, and at that time your heart practically stops. And most of the time you are able to control it. So but that particular moment when the aneurysm ruptures, it makes your heart stop.
So how many surgeries have you done so far?
Oh, how many surgeries? I don't know the exact number, but maybe around 15,000 or so.
Oh wow! Okay, I was not expecting such a huge number.
These days
That's
I'm
a lot.
operating.
15,000 surgeries. Wow.
Yeah, over the years the numbers just keep on increasing. These days I'm operating nearly 1,000 patients a year. So.
And so you've been like treating patients from world over. I was reading about you, and I think more than 96 countries. Patients from 96 countries, and you're so well traveled. You've been like treating patients in Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, mostly like practically most of the Asia. So how has been the experience, and how do you manage so much?
Well, it has been quite interesting since I came into private practice. Somehow medical tourism in India started around that time. So about 10-15 years ago. Though many patients were coming to Mumbai initially, particularly from Middle East, but that was only one city where they were going to. But around 10-15 years ago, patients from all across the world actually started coming to India. More often from Africa, Central Asia, whole of Middle East, but many patients come from Europe, US, Canada also. And so somehow I joined the private practice at that time, and so I have been treating patients from all across the world. I get at least 90 to 100 communications from patients every day on my WhatsApp from all over. So my professional travels took me to various countries, sometimes for meeting patients, sometimes to give lectures. So I've been to as exotic places as Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, whole of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and then practically I've traveled to most of Asia, a lot of countries in Africa. And sometimes your travel take you to beautiful locations like Mauritius and Fiji also, which were amazing places.
So, like being a neurosurgeon, that too from a developing country, was it like a little challenging in the beginning to get into this competitive world, and being from India especially? Did you ever feel that?
Well, these days I won't really call India a developing country. India is practically a developed country these days. But yes, when I did my neurosurgery residency in 1995, so things were difficult at that time. There was hardly any internet. The travel was very expensive. The salaries were extremely low. So to attend meetings and to travel for conferences was extremely difficult and challenging. Though when you say that how did your peers treat you across the world, yes, I really feel at that time they sort of looked down upon us initially. But I think as time passed, things in India started improving, and they also started looking us as an equal. In 2003, I was offered fellowship by both Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, and then I have been invited to Mayo Clinic before for giving lectures. So I liked the place, so I joined the fellowship there. So, and they treated me as an equal, and I was very loved and respected by everybody there. So it has been so good so far. And over the years now, I've been on the executive board of various international societies. So currently I am on World Spinal Column Society. I am the secretary, and again from one Middle Eastern Spine Society and many other societies.
Congratulations, sir, for your achievements, and this makes us all very proud and India proud.
And now I have got hundreds of friends all across the world, and including one of my best friends actually is in Pakistan. So neurosurgery is still a relatively small community, and so all of us keep in touch. And now the social media, particularly like WhatsApp, has brought a lot of people close together.
So there would be how many like very good neurosurgeons in the world? Like any like you can just count them?
It's very difficult to say because there may be a lot of good neurosurgeons whom I don't even know about. So yeah, but there may be thousands and thousands.
So you've been traveling the world. So any such unique hospital practices or some beliefs which you have come across, which has like really taken you for a surprise that, oh, this is happening like before the surgery, maybe relatives are doing something or after the surgery, or any such incident or story which is like...
I didn't see any of those things in other countries, but more often in India. So, like patients will say that their Panditji has taken a time between 10 to 11 only, and the patient has to be taken to operation room at that time only. Or sometimes they will say they don't want surgery tomorrow because it's a Wednesday or it's a Saturday, and so it's very difficult to argue with those beliefs, and we just respect their beliefs. So
Ajay, most of them are happening in India. That's
yeah, they may be happening in a lot of. I'm
but
sure.
Majorly, आपको यहीं पे experience.
But we don't face these problems directly there. Yeah, but while visiting other countries, the standard of care I found that is pretty much same in European countries or US. But in some poor countries, I was really saddened to see the lack of facilities, the lack of training, and I wish I could do something for them. Like for example, in one country I saw that for any spine surgery, you need to do an X-ray on the operation table to just localize where exactly you are. You want to be very precise in your surgery. But they did not have any X-ray facility. They were not even having MRIs before surgery. So they were just diagnosing them clinically. And I don't even know how they were diagnosing them, and just opening the whole spine. A huge big incision, opening the whole spine just to find something. And this was almost like practices in 19th century. So I was really saddened to see that. And I hope things get better in those places.
So who's right now the ruling country when it comes to medical and medical facilities?
See, as most of the companies are based out of US and most of the inventions actually come out of US. So obviously US is the most advanced country as far as the medical science is concerned. In the sense that they usually get the first new thing which comes out in the market. But very soon because now Indian hospitals are pretty affluent, they can afford to get things. So we get the same things within 6 months or 1 year. So over and all, I would say that India practically is the happening place right now, because we are the biggest medical tourism center in the world. Our hospitals are great. They provide the latest care, whatever is possible anywhere in the world. Our equipment is latest in the world. And obviously, because of the numbers that we treat, our experience is huge. So I think because of those reasons, India is a center for medical tourism. And on top of that, the costing in India is quite low as compared to Western countries. Even patients from very poor countries, they do come to India for treatment because they don't get the facilities there and they can afford to get treatment here.
So what does it need to be a good, successful doctor? What is it that you really need to do to be a successful doctor?
Firstly, you must be passionate about your job. You should really like your job and you should be willing to give everything for it. Medicine is a hard profession. You have to really work hard. You don't count hours. You forget about the family time. You don't have any personal time. So if you can afford to do all these things, then only you can think of becoming a doctor. On top of that, apart from, see, as compared to other professions, you have to be a really good human being. You have to be passionate towards your patients, their problems. Sometimes I get involved in the personal problems of some patients. And actually, there was one funny guy that the couple was a lawyer and they were fighting with each other all the time. And they used to come to me for their sort of marriage counseling. So
sometimes even that level of involvement with your patient happens.
Yeah. And you can imagine the level in involvement, because I get so many invitations to attend their weddings in their families, and sometimes the patients die. Even after that, they keep on sending you messages, thanking you, and that really gives you a great feeling. So you were talking about the satisfaction and the success for a doctor. Again, success can be measured in various ways. It can be professional satisfaction, it can be personal satisfaction, it can be academic satisfaction. For some people, it can be financial gains. So success can be monitored in various ways. For me, the biggest satisfaction comes when I see happy faces of a family when I have operated a patient and patient comes out of operation room. So that gives you the best feeling. And sometimes things do go wrong also. So that's where the communication with the family and the patient is very important. Because we are ultimately not gods. You cannot cure everybody and everything. And
I'm sure, yes.
And on a professional level, the success can be measured by peer process. Like if your peers respect your work and you're well published, your papers are accepted in international journals, you are invited for a lot of lectures because of recognition of your work. Again, that is also a big professional success.
Big satisfaction and success, yes.
Yeah, but for me, the biggest success has been to manage my professional life and balance it with my family life. So
that's what I was just coming to, because you said it's a very challenging profession where you hardly get any time for the family, and then you have to be alert so all the time. So how do you balance your personal and professional life?
Yeah, so see, it is very important to maintain your sanity, because if you don't get time for yourself, if you're always busy with your professional life, sometime or the other it will take you down. And neurosurgery being a bit morbid profession, like sometimes things go wrong when everything was going right and suddenly something may happen. So, and that may lead you depressed. So you need to find other avenues to let out your feelings. And so family is, I must say that family has been very supportive for me. My wife has been really supportive, because I used to work 12 to 14 hours a day, every day of my life. And she used to manage the house and take care of the kids. So family support is extremely important.
And now I think your son is also a doctor.
My son is also a doctor, but I made it sure, even during my working days, in my younger days, when my kids were young, I always used to take some time out every day to teach them. Not maybe every day, but at least 4 days a week, I used to teach them. And me and my wife had divided our subjects. So she used to teach half the subjects and I used to teach them other half. And perhaps that was the most cherished memories that I have.
Oh, wow. So school time, school days, and then those were the fun days.
So we always used to spend time. And then again, everybody gets busy with their professional lives. And this lockdown has really brought all of us together after a long time. So.
Sir, your one more achievement, the movie which is on Netflix, Rooting with Runa.
It's Rooting for Runa.
Rooting for Runa, yes. Your experience and how did you get that offer, and when the people from the industry called you that let's make a movie. I mean, the entire experience, and how did you agree to be a part of this project, and anything similar to this which you have also done?
Well, it's a long story. Basically Runa was suffering from a condition called congenital hydrocephalus, which is a pretty common condition, and we used to treat a lot of patients. And those are usually the earliest surgeries given to a trainee, because they are simple, straightforward surgery. So one of these media agencies, they shot a picture of Runa, and they contacted Fortis Hospital that she was from a remote village in Tripura, and that will we be able to do her surgery free of cost. And it was a simple, straightforward surgery. Usually patient stays in hospital for 1 or 2 days and then they can be sent home. So I said, okay, I will do it. They never told me about the size of her head or anything. So when the child arrived in hospital, I was completely aghast to see that her head was humongous. And actually it is the largest recorded head in the world till now. So a normal child's head at that age would be maybe 40 centimeters, and hers was 94 centimeters. And I don't know whether you have seen her photos. It looked almost like an extraterrestrial. And she was extremely weak, not even crying properly, very malnourished.
Malnourished, yes.
You can imagine the size of the head was so big, and she could not turn her head because it was so heavy. So the whole skin at the back of her head was eroded, infected. We never thought that she's going to survive for more than few days, and there was no precedent in the world ever to treat such kind of patients. So there was no experience to fall back on. So we had to invent every day a new thing as we went along, and luckily for us, things somehow fell into place. We almost lost her in several. We overall operated 7 times, I think, and we almost lost her 3 or 4 times. Blood pressure became very low, but somehow she was a big fighter and came out of it, and ultimately did quite well.
So any such similar cases which you are also dealing with?
So when I operated her, so initially, you were talking about the movie part. I did not know that they were making a movie on it. I just came to know a couple of months ago when they contacted me that to give my consent for the to give my clearance actually for the movie, whether the medical facts are right or not. So I never knew about it. But 3-4 years ago, I think Discovery had made a small documentary on it. So, and they were showing it internationally. So at that time, a lot of people contacted me from all across the world for similar kind of cases. But of course, you can't help everybody, and not everybody is suitable for surgery. But I operated a few patients, so it was quite interesting that I never log on to this LinkedIn. So somebody in Russia, one NGO in Russia, sent me a message on LinkedIn whether I would be willing to do such surgeries in Russia. And by chance, I clicked on LinkedIn that day and I saw that it's the kind of spam message, so I just ignored it. And they kept on sending me messages. So after 2-3 months, then I replied to them just to check out whether you keep on reading about the Nigerian scams and everything. So I really don't know.
Yeah, yes. You're always like little scared about communicating too much.
Being and operating in Russia seemed to me a bit far-fetched at that time. So I communicated with them, and then they persisted. They sent me photos of few kids. Then I realized that they were quite serious about it. But still, I didn't think at the time that they will get permission for me to operate in Moscow. But ultimately, they contacted their health authorities, and then they made my visit possible there. So I operated a couple of kids there, and I think one kid, his name was Matvey, operated 3 or 4 times. And at that time, the kid had similar problems. Her head was so big that he could not even move out of bed, could not even turn in bed. So now he has started walking. And
and how old is the child? How old?
Child would be nearly 5.5 now.
Okay.
And in Russia, such children are usually left in orphanage by their parents, and their orphanages take care of them. So I visited first him in his orphanage, which was outside Moscow. And I was amazed to see the kind of care that they were taking in the orphanage. And so I agreed to operate him. And now he was due for adoption. So his adoption was going to happen in July this year. But I think because of COVID, it has been delayed now.
So your advice to the entertainment industry?
To entertainment industry?
Yeah. Should they be encouraging more such films, and it should be on, do it commercially also? And I mean, your advice and the kind of content is being shown. What do you think about that?
The most of the content that is shown regarding medicine in most of the movies, even in Hollywood movies, is unbelievable. They show complete crap, to say the least. They are not real medical facts. A lot of things which cannot happen, they are shown there, which are either physically or medically not possible. Those are shown in the movies. And so I just hope that they do a little bit of research. It won't take more than 20-30 minutes to do that kind of research. Everything is available on Google these days. So I would wish that they don't show such things.
So, and a very general question which comes to mind, being a mother myself, how do you take care of children these days? I mean, the kind of is there any way to protect their brain and the mental health, and any precautions which are needed for at a very young age to be able to have a healthy, balanced mind?
See, the biggest problem I see these days is that children hardly go out. They are always glued to their mobiles or iPads or TV. So they don't go out, they don't play. Vitamin D deficiency has become a huge problem internationally because everybody is just sitting inside. Children don't even know the names of the outdoor games which we used to play so often. So they are missing out huge time on all these activities. So again, all these activities not only will uh, make them develop physically but mentally also. Lot of feeling when you are playing with 10 other children, a lot of different feelings come in your friendships, fights, you fight with them, you become friends with them, and these friendships last forever. And these days children are just playing on mobile games.
So human interaction is
It's
must
completely
and
lacking. So I think it is very important for their all-round development.
G. So what is your message to all our viewers?
Message to viewers, I would just say that whatever they want to do in life, they should put all their effort in it, and I think their dreams will come true. You have to believe in what you are doing, and you have to be passionate about it. If you don't like whatever you are doing, then leave it and do something else what you like to do. Like as I said before, neurosurgery, a lot of my residents, they have the neurosurgery, but they don't really like it. And some of them actually leave the course in between because they didn't like it. But as for me, right from my childhood, it was my dream to become a neurosurgeon. So I just love it. It's for me, it's just like playing my hobby every day. So for me, it's a win-win thing.
Sir, with the corona around, how has it changed your work style? I mean, how difficult is it to manage corona in hospitals?
See, it's not very difficult to manage corona in the hospital. It's just the way the corona has spread, and it has just changed everybody's lifestyle, the way they were working. Anybody who comes in, you never know whether he's carrying the disease or not. Many of my colleagues have had COVID with just a brief interaction with the patient or a colleague even. So more often they are actually getting infected by a colleague rather than the patients or some other person. A lot of people are actually getting it from families and then bringing it to the hospital. So hospitals, generally there's a misconception amongst people's mind that the hospitals are spreading corona. So people are scared to go to the hospital, while it is more often the other way around. But it's really challenging because once there is a COVID patient, because they are completely segregated, their wards are completely segregated. So the working in the hospital has become very challenging. Once a patient passes through a corridor or goes for an X-ray or a CT scan, the whole area, the whole passage, all the lifts, everything has to be sanitized, and only then the rest of the movement for the other patients or the doctors can start. So it's been very challenging last few months. And I have had occasion to operate at least 5-6 patients who were actually suffering from corona. And so it is not very easy to operate in an environment where everybody is in a PPE suit. And I am also wearing a PPE suit, sweating in it. You can't even see. Most of our surgeries are done under a microscope, and you can't easily see through a microscope with all those plastic things in front of your eyes. So it has not been easy, but yes, you have to live with it, and we are dealing with that.
So, and how soon do you see this settling down? I mean, getting rid of corona.
I hope that the vaccine works, and even if the vaccine works and if the successful vaccines are there, I think it will take at least 1 or 2 years internationally for the whole population to be vaccinated and for the disease to go down. I don't see any early cure right now.
Thank you, sir.
One thing has happened that because of this COVID thing, the human interaction with the patient has become much less. A lot of patients who used to come to OPD, now we are doing online consultations, so that human interaction is not there. We are hardly examining patients in the OPD, though only those who are in dire need of some physical examination, then we touch them. Otherwise, you just talk to them and just see their MRIs, and then you just maintain your own distance.
Sir, what is the most basic precaution one needs to be, taking for this corona? What is it which will keep you safe?
I think the most important things are firstly wearing a mask and maintaining your distance. And if you are touching anything, then just remember to wash your hands. So I think that so I've been working with COVID patients for last 9 months, and touch wood, me and my family still have been avoiding it till now. Though a lot of my colleagues have got it, but yes, if I think if you manage simple precautions, you still can be prevented. You still can prevent getting the disease. A lot of people are going to marriages and parties thinking that the life has to go on, but I don't accept that feeling. You know, in our own family, I know at least 70-80 people have suffered from the disease, and most of them were from parties only. So I would suggest people to stay away from these things for now, and parties can always happen later. Very passionate about organ donation, right? So because organ donation is one thing which is really lacking in India. So I've been supporting various NGOs who support organ donation and help people in getting information and disseminating the information and how to go about it and how to get the organs. So I have made a movie also. It's a small interview actually on YouTube on brain death. So I would suggest that you see it because people don't understand the concept of brain death. Anybody who is brain dead will always be dead. He can never come back alive. So any patient who is brain dead is a very good candidate for organ donation. And somehow, particularly in North India, it is very difficult to make people understand that. So very few people come forward for organ donation. I would seriously, I can actually plead with people to disseminate this fact that brain dead people can be organ donors and they will never come back to life. So don't waste those organs when you can save millions of lives. Okay.
Sure. Great message, sir. Good advice. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And it was wonderful talking to you, your fascinating journey, and I'm sure many more achievements your way, and wonderful to have you on a talk show, and hope to see you soon, very soon.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.